Hey, good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Nathan Thompson with the Wellness Way Yorkville. Happy Monday evening, guys, and welcome to tonight's live event. I'm starting a little bit early only because I have some things to do immediately afterwards that involves picking up one of my sons from soccer practice. So have to go a little bit early, but I want to make sure that I have the time to be able to get all of this in. I don't want to rush through it. I don't want to have to end it early. So that's why I'm starting a little bit early. So if you are missing the first part of this, you can always go back and watch the replay on YouTube, on Rumble, also on Facebook. And if you guys are watching right now, make sure that you say hello. Let me know also where you're watching from. I love to see where people are watching from. And if you do watch it, please comment. That way I get a good idea of how many people are watching, and gives me a good understanding of where people are watching from. Maybe if we get enough people from different time zones, we can go live at different times as well. So when I ask the question tonight, what is inflammation? What is inflammation? And because everybody talks about it, but not a lot of people can describe it well. So I'm going to explain to you exactly what inflammation is, and I'm going to give you a different perspective in regards to that. So we're going to talk about inflammation. This is actually a little bit different than our inflammation talk that we do in person. It's a little bit different than the inflammation talk that we do on the webinar, but I'll show you how you can register for that and deepen your understanding and your knowledge of inflammation and why that is the spark that leads to every single chronic degenerative disease out there. And if you don't handle that, don't try to fix your hormones. If you don't handle that, don't try to fix your energy. If you can't handle that, you don't know where that's coming from, don't try to manipulate your immune system as well. So hopefully, guys, you'll have an aha moment when we finish up and you'll say, wow, that makes a lot of sense. And hopefully it does for you, because that'll help you to understand where to start as far as on your journey to better health, better energy, better hormone function, things like that. So if you are watching, again, make sure that you say hello. And we have some awesome people that I've seen on here before. Thank you so much, guys, for commenting. Thank you for letting us know where you are watching from. I know that we have people from British Columbia, Canada, from Ontario, Canada, Ohio. We have people from Vancouver, South Carolina. Wow, this is awesome. Awesome. People from all over. It's Arizona. So awesome. Thank you guys so much for commenting. As we wait for people to jump on, a couple of announcements. But first, please answer this question for me. I've always thought maybe I should try to have a little bit more fun. And I made this post on Instagram and also on Facebook. It just absolutely blew up. So if you haven't commented, go back and comment on it, or you can comment here. Name a food that traumatized you as a child. Name a food that traumatized you as a child. I have a couple of them, and people ask me, I said, I'll start first. The food that traumatized me the most as a child was cheesecake. And people are dying to know the story behind the cheesecake. Real quickly, long story short, is that there is a company that exclusively makes cheesecake called Eli's Cheesecake. I think they're based around here in Chicago. And my family loved Eli's Cheesecake. And the idea of cheese and cake, I'm like, that doesn't go together. And I don't want to eat it. There's nothing I want to do. And my father, God bless him, because he's an amazing man. He says, you have to try the cheesecake. You have to. I was like, Dad, I don't want it. I'm not going to eat cheese and cake. I'll eat cheese. I'll eat cake. I'm not going to have cheesecake. And he said, no, you're going to have cheesecake. Can you imagine that? Trying to force me like very unhealthy food. And he forced me to eat cheesecake, and I threw it up. And I'll never forget that, standing over the sink, spitting out the cheesecake. I was absolutely traumatized, and he didn't mean it. I know he didn't, but just one of those things that stick out in my head. So name a food a food from childhood that traumatized you. And it was cheesecake for me, but some of the answers that people gave were absolutely hilarious. So let's have a little bit of fun and comment the food that traumatized you as a child. I'll wait for some comments. All right. So a couple of other things, guys. Approach to Inflammation is coming up October 19th, Thursday, 6 o'clock p.m. This is an in-person event here at Exemplify Health Center in the Wellness Way, Yorkville. So if you're from the Chicagoland area, get registered for that specifically if you want to work with myself and Dr. Brian here in the office. And this is actually kind of one of the things that we're going to talk about tonight as well, maybe not in as much detail. But inflammation is the spark that leads to every single disease that's out there. Who says so? Everybody does. So whatever profession you're in, we know that inflammation is a problem, but a lot of people just don't understand it. And I know that a lot of people, they'll reach out to me and they say, how can I work with you? And I'm like, well, if you haven't figured that out, I've gone live every week for 4 years. And if you haven't heard me speak about the webinar, then maybe you should follow me maybe a little bit more. So the webinar, you can watch that on demand. This is for specifically people not in the Chicagoland area. We do have limited availability to work with you remotely. And so if you are in the contiguous 48 states of the United States, you can go ahead and watch the webinar. Just follow the links at the top of the page in Linktree, and you'll be able to see where to register from. But you can watch that webinar on demand if you have about an hour of your time, but also you can schedule to watch it, I think, either Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock Central Standard Time or at 9 o'clock a.m. Central Standard Time on Saturday. So not from the Chicagoland area, make sure that you watch that webinar. There's going to be a link at the end to be able to schedule a call with me, and I'll be able to speak with you directly. And last but not least, if you guys have been watching us, we have an awesome event that's coming up. If you are from within a 4-hour radius, I would say come to it. Make it an awesome day trip. Dr. Patrick Flynn himself, who has a unbelievable following on social media, on Instagram and on TikTok. I used to be on TikTok. I got banned about 150,000 viewers. Apparently they didn't like what I was saying. But TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, huge following. Author of I Disagree book. He's going to be coming down to the Chicagoland area, specifically Yorkville, Illinois, Whitetail Ridge. This is going to be on October 24th. Get your tickets, go to the top and register for that. Tickets, I believe, are still $15. They're going to go up very, very soon from 6 to 9 p.m. But also we're going to be having food, hors d'oeuvres, prizes. It's going to be an unbelievable night, and the venue is absolutely beautiful. This is going to be well worth your time. Bring yourself, bring a friend, bring your spouse, even if they don't want to come, because I guarantee you when it finishes up, they're going to say, I am so thankful that I went to that. So let's go into inflammation, shall we? All right. Remember, if you haven't already, please let me know what that food that you ate as a child, which one traumatized you. I know that someone just said goat cheese. I'm like, yes. There's a lot of stories that I could tell. All funny when you look back to it. You can laugh about it once you've healed from your trauma. So let's talk about inflammation. All right. So it doesn't matter what health profession, whether you're allopathic or whether you're more natural, everybody agrees that inflammation is the spark that leads to every single disease that's out there. Here's something that's interesting. This actually comes from AARP Bulletin. This was a couple of years ago. I had a patient who brought it in, and they were just amazed. They're like, Dr. Nate, look at this. AARP actually agrees with you. And this was on the front cover of AARP Bulletin. It said the secret to good health and a longer life, understanding this one condition has been linked to dozens of serious diseases. Learn how to tame it today and forever. And it was inflammation. However, when you read the article, they didn't talk about what was causing the inflammation. They only talked about taming the inflammation. And also, when you look at the cover story or the inside of the story, they called it the cure for everything. Researchers have linked inflammation to nearly every single critical disease of aging. And people think of aging as how you look, but it's also aging inside of the body. I find it so amazing that so many people just, they ignore inflammation, and they spend so much time, money, and energy on fighting the effects of the inflammation, i.e. like on their skin, and doing things in order to try to improve their appearance. If you want to improve your appearance, understand what's causing inflammation, especially. So they said researchers have linked inflammation to every single critical disease of aging, reduce it now, and clear path to a happier, healthier, and longer life. So who agrees with that? Everybody. There's not one doctor that disagrees that inflammation is a real problem. But you know where we start to disagree? How we handle it. Where we take a fork in the road is how we treat it. Because here's the interesting thing. Medicine will treat inflammation by drugging the effects of inflammation, or drugging you to a point of knocking out the immune system to then cover up the inflammatory process. But rather, in the Wellness Way approach, one of the things that we say instead is saying, let's figure out what's causing it. so that we don't need the fire department in order to try to put out those fires, especially. So I went to Cleveland Clinic, because it's a very well-respected medical organization. You think of the Mayo Clinic and you look at the Cleveland Clinic as two of the most prestigious medical clinics in the United States. So I went to the Cleveland Clinic and they have a whole section on inflammation. I'm going to read it to you, but also show why it doesn't make sense and why I disagree with certain things that they actually say. So they ask the question, what is inflammation? Well, number one, when your body encounters an offending agent. So I want you to think of this. In order to have inflammation, there has to be something that offends the immune system, okay? And they go on to say, like viruses, bacteria, or toxic chemicals. There's other things they can do as well. Or when you suffer an injury. So when there's some kind of injury to your tissues. So when that happens, it activates your immune system. So your immune system sends out first responders, inflammatory cells, and then what are known as cytokines. You probably have heard of that when people have said cytokine storm, okay? So inflammatory cytokines are what are released from these immune cells, and what they do is they help with the inflammatory process in order to help further along and also attract other immune cells to the area, other immune cells and repair cells to that area. Now, these cells begin an inflammatory response in order to trap bacteria and other offending agents or to start healing injured tissue. And the result can be things like pain, swelling, redness, heat, things like that. So what they're describing is injury or infection, and then the acute inflammatory process. Acute inflammatory process. What's so amazing is when someone has an acute inflammatory process like redness, swelling, heat, pain, we do everything we can in order to try to inhibit it, but that's actually what's needed in order to bring about the healing response. So that's why a lot of times when I ask people, it's like, hey, if you sprained an ankle, should you put ice on it? They're like, absolutely. And I'm like, well, that's actually needed in order to stimulate a healing response. And it comes down to, is the body making a mistake, or is the body just stupid, or does the body not make a mistake? And that's the position that we come from. That's from the perspective that we come from. And say, hey, maybe if the body isn't making a mistake, here's what it's doing in order to try to help you. So they go on to say, what's the difference then between acute and chronic inflammation? So Cleveland Clinic says acute inflammation is the response to sudden body damage, such as cutting your finger. To heal the cut, your body needs to send out inflammatory cells to that injury, and those cells start the healing process. And they only talk about acute inflammation when it comes to an injury, but you can also have an acute inflammatory process when you have other things as well. So for example, you have bacterial infection, you're going to have an acute inflammatory reaction. And then they talk about chronic inflammation. They say this: your body continues sending inflammatory cells even when there is no outside danger. Interesting. So what they're saying is that chronic inflammation is the body messing up. So they're saying there's really nothing wrong here, and the immune system all of a sudden just starts to mess up. I say I disagree with that, because it's not as if the immune system all of a sudden knows what to do and then all of a sudden turns against you and doesn't know what to do. It's programmed to do one thing: respond to bacteria, viruses, tissue injury, toxic proteins, and then also what's interesting is that it's going to respond to food proteins. So they go on to say, for example, in rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory cells and substances attack joint tissues, leading to inflammation that comes and goes and can cause severe damage to joints with pain and deformities. The reality is that yes, rheumatoid arthritis does cause joint pain, joint destruction, and deformities. But the problem with this is that they're saying that rheumatoid arthritis, or autoimmune disease, is just a disease in and of itself. See, they're saying that autoimmunity is the disease, and I'm saying no, the inflammatory process is actually what is causing the autoimmune reaction, and that process is because the offending agent has yet to be identified. So it's not like the body is just going to attack itself for no reason. The body is smart, and maybe you haven't identified what is causing the immune system to respond to things that is creating perpetual inflammation. So here are some of the symptoms, according to Cleveland Clinic, of acute and chronic inflammation. If you have acute inflammation, you're going to have flushed skin at the site of the injury, like redness. You're going to have pain. You're going to have tenderness. You're going to have swelling. You're going to have heat. All of those describe acute inflammation. What's interesting is if the body's doing the right thing, that we do everything that we can in order to try to suppress it. Don't you find that interesting? Meaning, they're saying that acute inflammation is bad. No, you actually need acute inflammation, because if you never had an inflammatory process and you sprained your ankle, for example, you would never ever heal from it. There would be nothing to stimulate the healing and repair of that joint. Now, they say that chronic inflammation is harder to spot than acute inflammation, which I would actually say is true, because I think in the allopathic model that doctors are really bad at finding some of the symptoms of chronic inflammation. That's why we have so many people who come here, because they are finally at the end of the rope and they've been trying the allopathic approach for years, and finally they've run out of answers. So what are some signs of chronic inflammation according to the Cleveland Clinic? They talk about abdominal pain. They talk about chest pain. Here's what's huge. They talk about fatigue. Now, how many people, including women, this is huge, how many women suffer with fatigue? So they have fatigue, but the doctor hasn't identified that maybe they're inflamed and the adrenal gland is responding to that inflammatory process. Heck, even a lot of people in natural medicine, they'll call it adrenal fatigue. And I'm like, you don't have adrenal fatigue. You have adrenal downregulation. It's not adrenal fatigue, because that would be like saying so many people have pancreatic fatigue, and you don't see that until people have had diabetes for years and years and years and years. And so that's why someone coming in and saying, I'm 35 and I have adrenal fatigue, I'm like, yeah, there might be some truth to that, but maybe you should look at inflammatory triggers first and foremost. You might have chronic fever. You might have joint pain or stiffness. You may have mouth sores. You may have a skin rash, an example of psoriasis, for example. But what's so interesting is you're going to notice that some of these things, they come and they go. Why do they come? Why do they go? Because if it's chronic inflammation and they haven't figured out what is actually causing it, then and they're saying that the body is messing up. The body is messing up, then why does it come and go? All of a sudden, the body says, I'm going to attack you. No, today's not a good day. Okay, today's a good day for it. And so why on earth does it come and go? Because maybe there's inflammatory triggers that are getting worse, and some of them are getting better, but you can't figure it out because you don't know what the offending agent is. So what are some conditions associated with chronic inflammation? Here's what they talk about: Alzheimer's disease, asthma, cancer, heart disease, rheumatoid arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, or type 2 diabetes. Here's what's so interesting, guys, is that they're looking at some of the biggest disease killers that are out there, and they're saying that there is an inflammatory component. But let me ask you a question. When was the last time you went to your cardiologist and they even looked at inflammation? Because you know what they're looking at instead? They're looking at the effects of the inflammation, which is why they're seeing cholesterol that is being deposited underneath the arterial lining, and they're looking at that and saying that cholesterol is the offending agent, but maybe your cholesterol is responding to different inflammatory triggers. See, again, you have to come from the perspective, is the body messing up? Because people will say, oh, my body just works perfectly. Then all of a sudden it just starts to mess up. So there's an inflammatory component to heart disease. There's an inflammatory component to cancer. And there's even an inflammatory component when it comes to type 2 diabetes. Yet if you look at the treatment of type 2 diabetes, it's guaranteed that it will progress into insulin-dependent type 2 diabetes, which means you haven't figured out what the cause is, and you've only hushed the warning signs of diabetes and looking at blood work saying that everything is okay while that person continues to take more and more medications, and while it continues to get worse, and it continues with an inflammatory process as well. What's so interesting is even statin medications, if someone's got blood sugar issues, it can exacerbate type 2 diabetes, but they never talk about that as well. So here's some possible causes of inflammation, okay? Here's what the Cleveland Clinic says. Stick with me here. So what are most common causes of inflammation? Autoimmune disorders is a cause of inflammation. That's kind of like saying the cause of menopause is menopause. So Autoimmune disorders don't cause inflammation. Inflammation causes autoimmune disorders. It's just that they haven't figured out what the offending agent is, so that it's some kind of, I guess my body is misfiring, attacking itself. But remember, the immune system's not programmed to do that. Now, they also say exposure to toxins. I agree with that. And also untreated acute inflammation, such as infection. Here's what's so interesting is that many times when people come in, for example, when they have fatigue, one of the first places that we look is maybe they do have unresolved infection, whether that's a bacterial infection, like in the gastrointestinal system, whether that's a viral infection, like Epstein-Barr disease, cytomegalovirus, things like that. They may have an unresolved infection that's actually causing them to feel such tremendous fatigue. Now, what are some lifestyle things that can lead to chronic inflammation? Here's what Cleveland Clinic continues to say. They say, well, if you drink alcohol in excess. Now, here's the thing, is that the alcohol isn't inflammatory in and of itself unless you have a brewer's yeast allergy, but the alcohol causes destruction of the liver, which then damages tissue that then creates an inflammatory response. They also say if you have a high body mass index or if you have a high body fat percentage. I agree with that because fat cells in and of themselves are inflammatory. So fat cells can be inflammatory in and of themselves. That's why when you look at a certain marker known as high sensitivity C-reactive protein, the more fat accumulation that people have, the higher that marker is going to be. Now, the third thing they say is if you exercise at your maximum intensity too frequently. Now, I agree with that too, because I want you to think about it. If you are exercising too much, over exercise, and under recovered, then essentially what you're doing, because exercise, especially done at a high intensity, even high intensity weightlifting, is really designed to tear down your muscles and then allow them to be able to heal. That's why you do get soreness when you are doing some kind of weightlifting or doing some kind of high intensity exercise. The soreness that you feel is the inflammatory process of micro tearing of your muscle fibers that it must heal and repair. And when it repairs stronger. The body starts to adapt to it. So can over exercise create inflammation? The answer is yes, it can. I had firsthand experience when it comes to that. And in fact, I've even seen some elevated C-reactive protein. I'll go over these tests in just a second. And even elevated carcinogenic embryonic antigen, which is showing high tissue turnover because of just how I work out. So yes, that can do it. If you experience chronic stress, I agree with that as well. And also if you smoke. So people talk about, well, smoking is so bad for you. Why is that? Well, here's the reason why. Because smoking damages the lining of the lungs. It damages the barrier that separates internal versus external, number one. And then number two, you also are getting a lot of inhaled toxins as well that's going to activate the immune system. So people who do smoke are very chronically inflamed as well. And a lot of people don't even know why smoking will, cause all of these other diseases. Well, why does it cause lung cancer? Well, because the smoking, the chemicals are irritating the lining of the lungs, and the body is just trying to adapt to all of that irritation. That's why when you look at even cancer, you're looking at in a lot of types of cancer, you're just looking at a chronic inflammatory process that's taken place, and it's the body trying to adapt to it. This is true with colon cancer. This is true with esophageal cancer. This is true when it comes to lung cancer, and it's a response to chronic tissue injury. So the biggest thing I want you guys to understand is inflammation, number one, is an immune response. So that's what I understand is it's an immune system response. It's involving immune cells, and it's involving what the immune cells secrete in order to be able to attract other cells to that area to complete the inflammatory process. So it's the immune cells, and it's also the chemical that it secretes, like inflammatory cytokines, interleukins, things like that. So it's an immune response, but then you have to figure out, well, what is it responding to? What does the immune system respond to? And again, I'll say this, tissue injury. So what are you doing to injure your tissues? Most people understand Yeah, if I fall down and I sprain my ankle, then yeah, I'm going to have an inflammatory response. Or if I burn my, hand on the iron, then yeah, I'm going to have an inflammatory response. That people also don't understand is that there is acute trauma, but then there's also micro traumas that can take place. And then number two, it's an immune response to foreign proteins or proteins that are not part of the body. And let me help you to understand this, because usually when I give you this illustration, people are like, oh, that makes so much sense. And I want you to think of inflammation as this, because everybody talks about you need to suppress inflammation. You need to take a bunch of meds for it and not try to figure out what's causing it, or you just need to do a bunch of natural stuff. And meanwhile, you're not even identifying what is causing the inflammation in the first place. Okay. So I want you to think of this. If you decided that, hey, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to get 5,000 steps per day. 5,000 steps per day because I heard, yeah, I need to be moving a little bit more. And then, all right, awesome. But then you said, the only time that I can do it is at 9 o'clock at night when it's completely dark, but I'm going to do it anyway. So at 9 o'clock, you go out and you're going to walk around the block. And as you're going around the block, you don't see a buckle in the sidewalk and you hit that buckle and you fall down and you skin your knee. Okay. If you skinned your knee and you have tissue damage, that tissue damage, because you're going to have an immune response, it's going to get red, it's going to get swollen, it's going to get painful, and it's going to get hot. And that is normal and that is needed. By the way, yeah, you probably want to clean it out a little bit, but you don't need to eat some kale. You don't need to take a nap, and you don't need to run a 5K in order for that to heal. It's already built inside of the body. And that's why everybody says, oh, you need to exercise and eat right. You need to get enough sleep, and that's going to guarantee that you're healthy. If that were true, there'd be a lot more healthier people here, especially in the United States. So you're going to have an inflammatory reaction. Now, that will heal as long as you just don't keep falling on it. But let's say the next day you're like, you know what? I'm going to go out and I'm going to walk. It's 9 o'clock. And then you walk around the block and you fall and trip on that same buckle and you hit your knee in the exact same spot. And then you re-injure it again. So then you re-injure it again. And let's say you just didn't learn from it, which is a lot of people don't do. And you continue to do this every day for the next 3 months. And then you look down at that scab and it is just inflamed. It's seeping. It's infected. It looks ugly. And you decide, you know what? I'm going to go to the doctor. I'm going to get this checked out. The doctor looks at that scab on the knee and they run all kinds of tests. We're going to run a special test for people who have scabs that don't heal on their knee. We're probably going to get a tissue biopsy of it. And they come back after they do $5,000 of testing and they say, Mrs. Jones, what you thought is true, is that you do in fact have a case of unrelenting chronic knee scabitis. And you know what, a brick at that point, because it sounds so complex and it sounds so scary. And as soon as they put something in Latin and put an itis on the end of it, boy, I tell you what, that scares the living daylights out of you. And then immediately you say, what do I need to do? Well, we're going to put you on a course of some medications and do this and do this and do this. And there's all these complex solutions. And meanwhile, if you came to me, I would say, why do you keep injuring it? And let's figure that out and go from there. So I want you guys to understand is how I look at it and how other doctors, the other 75 doctors within the Wellness Way, how do we look at this? Is that if you had a scab on the knee that wasn't healing, we would call that an injury and not an illness. What if we started looking at if truly inflammation was a spark that led to every single disease out there, then shouldn't we then start to call heart disease an injury, or call cancer as an injury, or call autoimmunity as an injury, or call a problem with your hormones an injury, to call infertility as an injury, to call chronic pain as an injury? And guys, as soon as you start calling it an injury, that's actually where hope begins. Because if I say it's an injury, the next thing that you're going to say is awesome. What do I need to do to get it to heal and repair? Because when you sprain your ankle, the first thing you say is, what do I need to do in order to get it back to normal? What's so interesting is that if you have a sprained ankle, they say you can heal from that, but you can't heal from the other things that are involved with inflammation. So what if we started looking at inflammation as the same? It's just where the inflammation is the name that we actually put on it. So I want to help you give a different perspective. A lot of people don't like this perspective. And it's this: what if your body doesn't make mistakes? I really want you to think of it. What if your body doesn't make a mistake? And if you understand that if it's not making a mistake, then maybe I'm the one who's making a mistake and forcing my immune system to do its job. So, what if your body wasn't making a mistake? I'll give you a perfect example. I'll ask people, is blood pressure good or bad? And people are like, it's terrible. And I'm like, okay, well, let me give you an example. What if you walked outside and you came in, into close contact with a bear who hasn't eaten for 3 weeks? What's going to happen to your blood pressure? It's going to go up. And at that point, it's not bad. You need the high blood pressure in order to be able to run away from the bear. You're going to have a fight or flight or a stress response, which is a beautiful response when you're in the presence of an acute stress type of situation. Your blood sugar is going to mobilize in order to give you energy. All of the blood from the gastrointestinal system is going to divert to your extremities so that you can run faster, jump higher, oxygenate your muscles. Your respiration is going to increase. Your blood pressure is going to increase. All of those things are needed in order to help you survive. So in that case, blood pressure is not bad. Where it becomes bad is if the blood pressure never goes down. But that's why even when we look at blood pressure, we're saying, is this a stress response or is this also an inflammatory response that's taking place? And you know, guys, that we have helped people by teaching them the right things who have been on blood pressure medication for years, be able to get their blood pressure down to normal. Why? Because we identify the inflammatory triggers and also the stress triggers that are leading to it as well. And I catch so much flack, so much hate for doing that. And I say, why on earth would you be angry when someone got healthier so that they had the ability to be able to decrease their medications? Isn't that a good thing? But the problem is so many people in healthcare today, they want it to be their way, which is if you are so concerned, so angry that it wasn't your way, you're not a healer. What you are is you're in it for your ego. And if someone, no matter what they do, they truly get better, then I'm happy for them. Even if they don't even use my help, even if I don't agree 100% with what they did. But if they're getting off of drugs, they're getting off of medications, and they're getting healthier as a result, then I am so happy for them because I'm not tied to a specific model. I'm not tied to natural. I'm not tied to the allopathic model. That's not my identity. My identity is someone who wants people to heal. So does the body make mistakes? What if it doesn't? What if everything that's happening is an adaptation to inflammation and a couple of other things? So if you look at inflammation, guys, here's the 3 different models that are out there. Once you can identify the different models of how different professions address inflammation, it'll help you to make the choice that is going to be best for you. So I want you to think of this. All of the different things that are with inflammation and all the chronic degenerative diseases, whether it's heart disease, type 2 diabetes, cancer, high blood pressure, whatever it might be, is think of this. Here's what medicine does. They give you drugs to manipulate the immune system response. Now, is that needed sometimes? Yeah. So sometimes people need, we call it fire department care. But if someone has autoimmunity, think of this. Corticosteroids, what is that going to do? It's going to manipulate and lower the immune system response. Basically, what it does is you're just going to cut out the immune system so that it can't respond. It's basically cutting out the tongue of a screaming baby so that you just can't hear the baby, even though there's still a problem that's going on. Don't believe me? Have someone go off of corticosteroids, and what do you see? You see all the inflammation come back just exactly how it was. So they're going to give you drugs either to manipulate the immune system, or they're going to give you drugs to cover up the effects of the immune system response, i.e. things like blood pressure medication. And in fact, for a lot of people, I say you're going to need to be on these blood pressure medications until we get enough healing, and then talk to your doctor about the possibility of going off of them. And in fact, how do you know that you should talk to your doctor about the possibility of going off of a blood pressure medication? Well, if you're on a blood pressure medication and you're waking up in the morning and you're dizzy because your blood pressure is going back to normal, and then the medication is now manipulating the systolic number by about 15 or 20 points. But then what people say, in fact, you may be watching this because of it, you may be watching it and saying, well, I want something that's natural. And I even have a problem with natural medicine quite a bit, because it's just taking something that manipulates and can be toxic, and then taking something that still manipulates, but it's just not toxic. And it's still the fire department approach rather than getting to the reason why it's happening. So that's why even so many allopathic physicians who are like, well, I want to go into the natural realm, but then all they say is, well, you need to eat an anti-inflammatory diet. I'm like that doesn't make sense, because the body doesn't respond to sugar as inflammation. It only responds to foreign proteins. So then they say, well, we just, make sure that you take your curcumins, your curcuminoids, your boswellia, your fish oils in order to keep those inflammatory levels down. And those things can work to a certain point, but there's nothing more powerful than identifying what the inflammatory trigger is. So in the wellness way and our approach, we say this: hey, maybe the body isn't making a mistake. Maybe we should just find the source of the inflammation. And what's the source of the inflammation? Tissue injury and foreign proteins. Tissue injury and foreign proteins. So what are you doing to injure the tissue? And what are you doing? Is there some kind of viral infection going on, bacterial infection? Or is there some kind of other foreign protein that could be a toxin, that could be something that's implanted, or something that could also be a food protein as well? So let's talk about tissue injury, okay? So what causes tissue injury? Number one, trauma. You sprained your ankle. You hurt your shoulder. That's going to cause an inflammatory process. That's an acute type of injury, or a car accident, for example. But here's some of the things that people never, ever identify. If you have poor structure, a poor structure of the physical frame, for example, you're in a granny posture, because you don't line up with gravity, it will cause an inflammatory process. Don't believe me? Look at an x-ray of someone with granny posture and you will see calcification lining all up and down. And the only reason why something calcifies is because it has been inflamed. So you can have poor structure. That's why we look at an x-ray. You may also have improper movement. So think of this: if you can't squat correctly, and you can't, for example, have good flexibility of your ankles, if you don't have good flexibility to be able to open up your hips or externally rotate your hips, and you try to squat, you won't be able to do it right. And every time you squat, is the joint that's going to bark the most is your knees. So when people say, oh, I can't squat because it hurts my knees, no, you should be able to squat. The reason why it hurts your knees is because you don't know how to move right, or some kind of restriction. So improper movement will create tissue injury. How about overexercise? That can create tissue injury, because if you're exercising more than what your body is able to recover from, then that will facilitate chronic inflammation, leading eventually to injury. So that's why, guys, that when you exercise, when people say, hey, I'm going to start exercising, I say, hey, congratulations. Now you need to spend time exercising, and now you need to spend time recovering. That means you're going to need to sleep more as well. But then also what injures your cells. So things that injure the cells, in which they're either going to put a flag up and say, hey, I'm sick, I'm injured, or I'm not like myself it was, that is going to stimulate an immune system reaction. So what will cause an injured cell? A viral infection will cause an injured cell. Type 2 diabetes will cause an injured cell. Elevations of blood sugar over a long period of time will cause something known as advanced glycation end stages that damages the tissue. And that's why people with type 2 diabetes, why they have so much inflammation in their joints and inflammation on their skins. It's the elevations of blood sugar that's creating the tissue damage that then demands that the immune system has to respond to it. But then also fat cells in and of themselves will create an inflammatory process. So the first thing you have to look at is, where am I damaging and where am I injuring my tissues? But then the second thing is, all right, where is there foreign proteins involved? The immune system is designed to be able to identify foreign versus self, foreign versus self. And so if you have a foreign protein, the whole job of the immune system is to say, let's keep foreign proteins out, whether they're bacteria, virus, whether they're a toxin. And this is why barrier integrity is so important. So where are you getting the foreign proteins? It might be a bacteria, might be a virus. And where are we getting most of our bacteria from? Remember, they're everywhere. You have so much bacteria in your mouth. You have so much bacteria on your skin. You have so much bacteria living in the gastrointestinal system, but you have a barrier that protects you from it, which is where I'm going is you damage the barrier integrity, get sick, then good luck trying to not stay inflamed. So bacteria, viruses, but then also toxins. And this is what a lot of people don't consider because toxins, people think, well, it's air pollution. Yeah, it can be, but you know where we have more exposure is from mold mycotoxins, like a water damaged building, or from biotoxins, which would be considered Lyme disease. But here's the other thing that a lot of people don't realize is implants, like breast implants, for example. I just had a conversation with a young woman who feels absolutely awful and horrible. And I remember looking at her history. She didn't tell me this. And she has really felt bad for the last 2.5 years, a lot of explainable symptoms that are going on. And I looked at her history. She didn't tell me this, but she said, yeah, I have breast implants. And then I remember I was talking to her. I said, have you thought that maybe the breast implants are making you sick because it's the immune system responding to it? And she looked at me and she says, I've thought about it for the last 2 years, but just no one has brought it up to me. So it can't even be foreign bodies like breast implants. And then the last thing is food proteins, which nobody ever really brings up, is because your immune system is designed to go after foreign proteins. What if you're not breaking your food down the way that you're supposed to because you have low stomach acid and your body is in a chronic stress state? And now instead of breaking those foods down into amino acids, they're staying in existence into long chain proteins that then have the ability to be able to leak through the gastrointestinal barrier and then cause an immune system reaction. And in fact, we are one of the only doctors who truly can address that by doing IgG, IgE food allergy testing. But you know what other professions say about food allergy testing is they say this: it just means that you've had exposure. And I'm like, don't you just realize what you just said? Because you have number one, a stomach that's designed to break down foods from proteins into amino acids, number one. And number two, you have a barrier in the gastrointestinal system that's supposed to separate internal, external environment. So if you're having exposure, just prove my point, you're not supposed to have exposure to it. So how do you find it? How do you find inflammation? Here's how we find it. Number one, calcification. I want you to think about this. Calcification. This is why x-rays can be very important. In fact, if you're watching on YouTube, Rumble, if you're watching on Facebook, will see something. And let's see if I can get the pointer out. There it is. And you will see, if you look at this x-ray of the spine, when people say, oh my gosh, I have arthritis, what is it? Arthritis means inflammation of the joint. How does the body try to heal it? Through calcification. So if you look here and you see all of the hooking and spurring coming off, that's a chronic inflammatory process that's causing the spine to become calcified. What causes it to become calcified? Chronic injury. And if you look at this person, a spine not in the right position is a chronic injury that allows it to be able to calcify because it stays chronically inflamed. So your spine, when it calcifies, means that it is inflamed. And I want you to think of this too. Anytime that there's chronic inflammation, there's going to be calcification. You can even see it on an x-ray. So I want you to think of this. What do chronically inflamed arteries, what happens to them? They form plaques and that they actually calcify. So you can even see calcified plaquing, depending on what you're x-raying, but you can see it in the carotid arteries, the vertebral arteries. You can see it in the abdominal aorta. And then also you can even see calcification of the thyroid. So if you see someone who's got a calcified thyroid, you're saying your thyroid has been inflamed. And as a result, it calcifies. And so that can actually see, hey, this is where the body is inflamed. How else do you find it? Well, you can test and see for inflammation around the barriers. So this is actually a food allergy, an IgG food allergy test, and also a stool test of an individual. And here's what was going on. Only in her mid-30s, she had chronic viral infections. She had Lyme disease. She had terrible joint pain and terrible fatigue. And she was on about 8 medications when she came in. By the time we followed up with her in about 4 weeks, the 8 medications had gone down to 2. So when we look at this, she had 31 different IgG immune system reactions that were taking place around the gastrointestinal barrier. Why did she have so many? Because her gastrointestinal barrier had no integrity to it, and those proteins not getting broken down because she was so stressed all of the time. And in fact, even an infection can lower stomach acid, and then they were leaking through. So how on earth is she supposed to get out of this, help her immune system to be able to recover if she kept inflaming herself? And then when you look at her gastrointestinal barrier, you can see right here, secretory IgA. It means the gastrointestinal barrier is inflamed, not to mention a lot of other things with her microbiome and having infection and things like that. But what's so interesting is once we started helping with the inflammatory process, she was able to actually go off about 6 medications at that point. And by the way, talk to your doctor about this because I can't take you off of medications. So for those of you who are getting triggered, just relax. But I'm like, how do you feel though? She's like, my joints don't hurt. I don't feel bloated. I don't feel so swollen. And oh my gosh, I'm sleeping better. And I'm also, I don't feel so inflamed anymore. And my energy is coming back. Like, what is going on? That's how you'll feel when you are not stimulating the immune system all the time. How do you find it in the blood? So how do you find it? So here's some things that you can do on an x-ray. Here's some things that you can do even just doing food allergy testing or looking at barrier testing. How do you even also find it? You can also find it in the blood. So here's actually some of her blood work that we did. And you can see that even when you look at this, now I'm going to go like on a little bit of a tangent, but you can see someone who is in their 30s and you see that they already have LDL. They have a cardiologist would say you have an elevated LDL. This is really bad. You're going to be building heart disease. But the reason why that LDL is elevated because she's inflamed and not vice versa. So you can imagine though, once she hits menopause, I'll guarantee you if she doesn't correct why this is happening, that LDL will jump up 40 to 50 points once she goes into menopause and she doesn't have the cardioprotective effects of estrogens because estrogens go down during menopause and it's a normal process. So if you look at her C-reactive protein, you can see 4.4 when really the C-reactive protein should be under 1. So this is an inflammatory protein that's made from the liver. So how can you find it in the blood? High sensitivity C-reactive protein. You can also measure what's known as homocysteine, but I will tell you this, is that what's a better marker than homocysteine is S-adenosyl homocysteine, which is a precursor to homocysteine. That's a better marker. Not a lot of labs actually do run that, but you can also run an immune panel and look at different types of white blood cells. Guys, if you look at what's elevated, what kind of immune cell is elevated, it can help you to see really what you're dealing with. Because if you do have certain elevations, certain kind of immune cells, it can actually, you can kind of get an idea of saying, hey, is this a viral issue? Is this a tissue injury type issue that's going on? And then also you can run a viral panel. I think that especially for people who have unrelenting things that no one is figuring out, run a viral panel and look at things like Epstein-Barr virus, cytomegalovirus, parvovirus, Fifth disease, different types of herpes infections and things like that. It's not like you necessarily caught them. These things live inside the body because once you've had exposure, they live there forever. And the only time that they ever come out is if you allow for immunosuppression to take place and they start to go unimpeded within the body and the immune system can't catch up to it. Can you even find it in the urine? Yes. You can actually do a mycotoxin profile. And here's someone who is absolutely riddled with all kinds of inflammation because she had mold mycotoxicity. Excuse me. This is where a lot of doctors never test this. They never, ever think of this. But if I see a person who just no one's been able to help and has mysterious, bizarre type symptoms, not only that, if they're seeing that other family members who are sharing the same household environment are having some of the same issues, consider that maybe it's not the person, maybe it's the environment that they're sharing. So this person has ochratoxin, which is one of the most virulent mycotoxins that's associated with systemic inflammation. That's why you can have a lot of lung issues, a lot of sinus issues, a lot of issues with brain fog, excessive thirst, frequent urination, kidney issues, high cholesterol. You can also have zero hormones because the person is so inflamed that they're going to have so many problems with their hormones as well. And doctors aren't looking at this. And in fact, you have a woman who's in menopause with mycotoxic illness, they'll just throw them on hormone replacement therapy and it'll make them feel a little bit better. But remember, the body always finds a way around it. So you can even measure this on a mycotoxin profile and measure it for the presence of mycotoxins getting excreted from the urine. So going back to the original thing is, what on earth causes inflammation? This is the whole premise that we talk about. This is actually the original premise of chiropractic. And it's gotten so jaded and so miscommunicated, over, I think, probably the last 50 or 60 years. But the Wellness Way says this: let's take it back to the original premise, but let's bring it into the 21st century. What causes inflammation? Mental stress, chemical inflammation, and physical trauma. That's what's doing it. That's involving the immune system. Find what's causing it, fix it, correct it, allow the body to be able to heal on its own, because the body is magnificent. The body is smart. The body is intelligent. The best physician that lives is inside of you. It's not at the hospital. It's not me. It's not at Mayo Clinic. It's not at Cleveland Clinic. We have more chronic illness than ever before, more people who haven't gotten any kind of answers than ever before. Yet we still are so pinned to I'm never going to change my philosophy. I can't, because this is my identity. I can't go outside of that. When in reality, we should be working like crazy to figure out everything that we can do in order to honor the patient, in order to help them get better. So I'm going to leave you guys with this. I want you to think about this. We have more and more specialists than ever before. We have more and more specialists than ever before, and fewer who are able to connect the dots. Isn't that true? We have more and more specialists than ever before, and fewer individuals who are able to connect the dots. And the reason why is because we get so hyper-focused on one organ versus going and completely forgetting about the fact that inflammation is a systemic issue, and it affects every single organ, every single tissue, every single gland inside the body. And it's called the Swiss watch principle. So hopefully, guys, if you found value in this, please do me a favor. Please share this video with other people who you feel it could benefit. Please do that, because there are people who have lost hope. And once the first step to recovery is to have hope. And so let them know that there is hope. And we do see the people who everyone has given up on. And unfortunately, we see a lot of people too who are their last hope. And I wish that we didn't have to be their last hope. We actually should be their first line of defense. So guys, with that being said, make sure that if you're from the Chicagoland area, please get registered for the upcoming inflammation talk on Thursday, October 19th at 6:00 p.m. We'll talk about inflammation even deeper. And also, if you're from the contiguous 48 states, not in the Chicagoland area, you can watch the webinar. Just go to the top of the page, pinned, it's the Linktree page, and you'll see, if you click that link, you'll say how to register for that webinar, and make sure that you can watch it and help you get up a different perspective when it comes to hearing. There's a really good story at the end that I think that will touch your heart as well. And if you haven't gotten your tickets, guys, please do me a favor. If you enjoy these live videos, do me a favor and get registered for the I Disagree tour with Dr. Patrick Flynn. He'll be in Yorkville, Illinois, Tuesday, October 24, 2023, from 6 to 9 p.m. Guys, this is something that I, from the bottom of my heart, you do not want to miss this. You will get so much benefit from doing this. You will probably laugh. You'll probably cry. You'll probably be a little bit offended sometimes. But at the end of the day, you will be happy that you came, and you'll be happy, even happier that your spouse came as well. So what is inflammation? Hopefully, I answered that question good enough for you to get an understanding as far as what you need to do next. And if you don't have any answers, reach out to me or reach out to the Wellness Way. Find a doctor close to you, or I can work with you as well. But the biggest thing that I would tell you is when you have hope, that's the first step to help you getting well. So guys, I have to go and pick up my son now because I'm almost going to be late. But guys, I hope you enjoyed this. Please share this video. Be well, be blessed. And as always, remember who you are.